Okay, here comes a boring video about a boring subject, tax. I'm going to show that nothing's quite what it seems. We're all being misled, and that's causing a lot of trouble, and we've got some really seriously bad policies because of it. And I'm not going to continue much longer, so you won't have to watch me. It's going to be mostly the diagrams now, so let's get started. These diagrams show what's really going on with jobs and taxes. They were prepared by a retired accountant. He's no longer with us, and they relate to 2022, but things haven't changed much for a very long time. The first diagram shows what's happening with somebody with a nominal gross pay of £30,000 a year, which is a lot of people. I split it into two, the brown and the green. The green is what somebody would pay in sales taxes, including VAT and alcohol tax and all the other things. The accountant estimated it at about 15% of the total. And the brown, therefore, is the actual net value of the goods and services that the wage will buy. Now, the next diagram shows income tax headed on, that's in yellow. And then the next diagram on from that shows employees' national insurance with the red blob, which brings us up to our 30,000. And then on top of that, we've got a blue strip, which is the employer's national insurance, and that's got bigger, and that brings us up to about 35,000. Which is the length of the magenta bar at the bottom of all the diagrams. It's all in the pie chart here. The browny colour is the real value of the goods and services that can be bought. The green is the sales tax. The yellow is income tax. The red is employees' national insurance. The blue is employers' national insurance. And so you can see that almost half of the total labour cost is made up of tax. This diagram here shows what happens over all the wage ranges from £10,000 to £500,000 now at £10,000 because that's below the income tax threshold. The real wage is nearly 80% of the total gross labour cost. That's not too bad. I think that's got worse because the Chancellor decided to reduce the threshold for national insurance, but that's roughly the picture. As soon as income tax kicks in above the threshold, the real wage goes down to 60%, and as you get into the higher rate of income tax, it goes down to about 50%, and it goes on getting worse in the higher ranges of pay. I've rolled all the tax into one bar, so we've got the green is real wages and the red is tax, and you can see that what a big bite of gross labour cost is actually made up of tax. In the public sector, the red has to be paid for by the taxpayer, so people are being paid money to pay tax with by the government, so the money's just looping round. It's particularly bad in the National Health Service because you've got so many professionals and managers, and the civil service generally, it's really tax is a huge burden on the public sector. It's absurd, isn't it? But doesn't seem to get noticed. Now for some conclusions. Firstly, tax incidence, which is the principle that the burden of a tax does not necessarily fall on whoever is nominally responsible for paying that tax. The next is that the incidence of all wage-related taxes, that's income tax and insurance charges, whatever they're labelled, is on the employer and form part of labour costs. These taxes have the same effect as a payroll tax and can perfectly well be replaced by a payroll tax, which I'm not suggesting this, but it would at least simplify the system. In the public sector, this means that the government is paying out large amounts of money for people to pay back in tax. the money is just looping round. It's a known phenomenon, it's called churning. These taxes are a substantial part of the cost of employing managers and professionals, for example in the National Health Service and on the railways. The burden of sales taxes such as VAT also falls on employers because these costs have to be built into net wages. We've ended up with a low-wage, high labour cost economy. Manufacturers have moved production to countries where labour costs are low, but where real wages are not necessarily low. They might be, but they're not necessarily the case. Primary production has become uneconomic. Workers are replaced by capital, for example, self-service checkout machines in supermarkets. And finally, employers have to pressure their workers so as to cover the high costs of employing them. It's a disaster.